Welcome to The Warp. I'm Jack Rita, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the three different reward decks, what their compositions are, why they were designed that way, and any other fun facts that I could think of. The reward deck was a concept that I came up with back in the Mayfair days. Back then, the Mayfair Encounter deck, what was the Cosmic deck, was already pretty thick. It already reached the point where there were too many cards in it before you added in anything from a homebrew. And homebrewing was something I really got into back in the Mayfair days. So I had a lot of ideas, and the internet was also contributing a lot of ideas even back then. So I figured, you know what, we needed to separate out some of those other cards into their own deck, and the mechanism for accessing them would be rewards, which was something that already existed. So now you had a third source for using your rewards, and that was a unique deck of cards. Now, when Kevin Wilson started to do the Fantasy Flight edition of Cosmic Encounter, he really liked the idea of the reward deck, which is why it was the variant included in the first expansion, which is Cosmic Incursion. So the Cosmic Incursion reward deck is 32 cards, curated by Kevin Wilson. And what he did was he looked at some of the card types that were part of Cosmic Encounter lore. The Mayfair edition had things like kickers in the Encounter deck, but he felt like it was too much to have in the Cosmic deck for the base game, and having them shuffled in didn't make a lot of sense. The reward deck was really the best place for them. So stuff like that was what he was going to put in there. And he decided early on that the card backs were going to be different from what's on the Cosmic deck. And that way you could easily shuffle them out when you were cleaning up afterwards. But it did mean that people would know that you had reward cards in your hand, and they would know which ones were reward cards. And that's why he came up with the concept for the Rift, which is a card that you can use on your turn, but if somebody takes it from you, it's like a booby trap, and it forces you to lose a certain number of ships. So let's look at the composition of the Incursion deck itself. So it comes with 11 attack cards, and the highest is a 23, but it introduced some negative attack cards. So there were not any negative attack cards in the regular base game Encounter deck. And there were negative cards in the previous edition, but again, it was just something that, why introduce that in the base game? That sounds like an expansion idea. So putting them in the reward deck makes going to the reward deck not always going to be something that pays off. I would say that most of the time, about 80% of the time when you go to the reward deck, you're getting something that's pretty good, if not great. But unless you're an alien-like loser or antimatter, you don't want those negative attack cards. So there's always going to be a little bit of risk going in there. And that was definitely part of my original design. So I had some clunkers in my reward deck because I did want it to be a risky proposition. You're not always going to get something good. So you got those negatives. You got another morph. So this was actually the first time a second morph, well, more than one morph was going to be in the game. And it did create the situation of what happens when you have morph versus morph. Well, then both sides lose. So after the Incursion expansion, you could finally have that situation occur. Some additional reinforcements in there with some pretty good numbers there. So no 2s and 3s here. It goes up to 6. 3 negotiates, but these were going to be special negotiates, and they were all crooked deals, which is an interesting, very simple concept. You get 1 extra card in compensation if you're opposed by an attack, and if it's a deal situation, then if you played the crooked deal, you would lose 1 fewer ship if the deal fails, and your opponent would lose 1 more. So a nice little simple twist on it. As I mentioned, kickers were finally part of Cosmic Encounter's Fantasy Flight Edition with the Incursion reward deck. So these are the multipliers that you play with your encounter cards. You have a 0, which again is, not necessarily one that you're going to want. A couple of 2s, and then the ×3, which turns your attack 10 into a 30, or your attack 30 into a 90. Nice, powerful effect. Not very many of them in there because you want, again, keep a nice balance of what's in there. And I mentioned the Rift cards. So There were 4 Rift cards that were part of this expansion. And again, the number on the Rift card is how many of your ships, or how many ships in general, you can free at the start of your encounter. They don't have to be yours, but they usually will be. And that's how many ships somebody would lose if they take that card from you. And then finally, the Incursion reward deck has 5 artifacts, 2 of which were repeats from the base game. So another Cosmic Zap, another Card Zap, but then a couple of ones that were part of previous editions of Cosmic Encounter. And now they were finally in the Fantasy Flight edition. So when it came time to put together what was going to be in Cosmic Dominion, which was the 5th expansion, and I was one of 3 designers that worked on that and decided what was going to be in there, contributed some ideas, but it was largely fan-designed overall. The Cosmic Incursion reward deck has generally been considered the most popular variant for Cosmic Encounter. Most people who play Cosmic regularly, they're going to use it. They use it in just about every game, but the only time you don't use it is if you're teaching the game to a lot of new players, because you don't want to have to teach them how rifts and kickers work in addition to all the other cards. So it doesn't get often, although I'll go ahead and use it anyway. I'm like, you know what, suck it up. You're a gamer. This is not too much for you. But we used the composition of the Incursion reward deck to help guide us in what should be in the Dominion reward deck. So we did a little side-by-side. We're like, all right, here's how many attacks and counter cards in general, how many artifacts, how many special cards, new stuff, and we deviated a little bit from that, but you'll see. So there are no regular attack cards in the Dominion reward deck. There are all these variable attack cards. We have 5 of them, and the 2 numbers, which are inversions of each other. So you've got a 0-2, 2-0, 0-3, 3-0, 1-2, 2-1. And they're triggered by the hazard warning in the Destiny deck. So if one of those comes up, then this card's white number is the number that this would be when this card is revealed. Otherwise, this is an attack 2. And if there's a hazard warning, it's a 20. And it forces people who've got these cards to pay a little bit more close attention to the Destiny deck as cards are coming up. And they're like, oh, look, somebody drew one with the hazard warning. So if I'm in an encounter, I could turn this into a 30, and that could be pretty good for me. So we thought that was an interesting idea. Again, it's the only attack cards that are in the expansion. We did add another morph. We liked the idea of having a morph versus morph. And so with the Incursion, you had 2. With the Cosmic Alliance, large group cards, had a 3rd one. This added a 4th one, which delighted us to no end. We loved the Crooked Deals, so all of the negotiates have special effects, but we decided instead of 3 of the same effect, we had 4 individual effects. Epic Oratory is probably a fan favorite. It's one where you can make a deal, and the people in the deal can each gain 2 colonies rather than the normal limit of 1. But all of the effects are interesting new takes on the negotiate. And we decided to add in a new type of encounter card. So this is a retreat. And the way it works is you lose, just like it's a negotiate card, but none of the ships on your side go to the warp. They all return to colonies. So it's a nice way to mitigate the effects of having to lose the encounter. And of course, if it's opposed by anything other than an attack card, it becomes a negotiate, which will trigger a deal situation. So that's really what's going to happen. There was some talk about how many to include. We thought 2, and by we, mostly me, I pushed for only 2, because if we added a 3rd one, it meant we were not going to have one of the other cards. And I really liked all of the cards that we included in there. Only 2 reinforcements, but one of them is a special one, a +X, which is the number of ships on one side of the encounter. So if you're on the defense and the attacker has brought a lot of allies, this really takes out the sting there, because their +8 allies is now +8 on your side. So you can decide which side ships you want to add to your side or the other side. We also added another type of card. It's not an encounter card, although it ends up being one, and those are the Intimidates. And that's why there's only 5 of the special attack cards compared to 11 attack cards in the Incursion expansion. But with these 4 Intimidates, that brings those numbers closer together. Now, this started off as a defend card, which is a concept that I had come up with way back when. And people liked it, but then it went through some design iterations. It turned into a reflect card for a while. Then it was an ultimatum card. And this was the consensus card. It's probably the most complex card in Cosmic Encounter, although I don't think it's that complex. But it is a card that anybody can play face down. And if you are a main player and your ally has played one of these face down, you can choose to reveal their Intimidate rather than your encounter card. And it gives you some options. The other player doesn't know which one you're going to reveal. And likewise, if somebody on their side has an Intimidate face down, they could also choose to reveal it rather than the encounter card that they played. But it's an Intimidate, and the idea is if you're going to play an attack card against me, you might be facing, a 39 or a 29 or a 19, or of course the bluff card, the -9, unless you're antimatter or loser. But if it's opposed by anything other than an attack card, it becomes a negotiate. So it's a way to get yourself into a nice deal situation, which is why I like these cards quite a bit. We figured we can't have another reward deck without adding more kickers. So there's 5 kickers in this one, opposed to the 4 kickers that were in Incursion. So 9 kickers in the combined decks. But these are all, again, they're all special. They all have little secondary effects on there, -1 all the way up to a ×4. But the ×4, does not affect compensations or failed deals, which normally a kicker can affect. So again, and I'll get to this at the end of talking about the hot Dominion reward deck versus the cold Incursion one. So don't let me forget. We have to have rifts because, again, we need those booby traps. So there's 4 more rifts. But the theme of Dominion was playing around with stuff. So the rifts in this one, they do something different. We do have a 3, which is just like the ones from Incursion. But the 1 and the 2, which are different values from the ones in Incursion, they have different effects. So 1 affects colonies. You can gain a colony on an empty planet, or you'll lose a colony if you take it. And the 2s let you draw cards or force you to lose cards if you take it. So, again, a variation on how rifts work and break it up. And then finally, just as in Incursion, we included 5 artifacts in the Dominion one. But these are all new artifacts. Nothing is held over from the base game. So no more Cosmic Zaps or Card Zaps or Force Fields. Although the Omni Zap can be used as a Card Zap or a Cosmic Zap. It can zap quite a few things. And then you had Ship Zap, which is also brand new to the Fantasy Flight Edition. Victory Boon, Solar Wind, and Rebirth were classic artifacts that had not yet been part of the Fantasy Flight Edition, so we included those. So, as I mentioned before, the one criticism, and I hesitate to even use that word, about the Incursion reward deck was that the cards in it are generally pretty good, but there's nothing in it that's super powerful. The kicker 3, that's pretty good. But on the whole, there's a lot of attack 10s and, of course, the negatives. You got some negotiates, decent reinforcements, nothing overwhelming. So we gave ourselves permission with the Dominion reward deck to really crank up the heat. So I would say that if you only are using the Dominion reward deck, it's maybe a little bit too hot. I mean, some of the cards in there are really good. And unlike my idea of having some clunkers in the reward deck, that got shot down during the development of Dominion. The other 2 guys didn't want to put any bad cards in there. So your odds of getting a really, really good card when you go to just the Dominion reward deck are very high. And that is why ultimately, the 2 decks are designed to be combined. We feel like they complement each other really well. And again, your odds of getting a super powerful card are reduced a little bit by the inclusion of 32 generally pretty good cards, but nothing super powerful. There's no ×4 kicker unless you're adding in the Dominion deck. So those 2 combined decks make for a really good composition of rewards. Now, when it came time to do Cosmic Odyssey, one of the major themes of that expansion was that it expands on the other expansions. And because of the campaign and it references different variants, it needed to include a standalone version of all of the variants. So there's a standalone version of the hazard deck and a standalone space stations. And there needed to be a standalone reward deck. It's smaller, so there's only 23 cards as opposed to 32 from the other 2 reward decks. And it did also include 9 ultra rewards, which I'll talk about in another video. And those are designed to be mixed in as well. But I wanted to make sure that the composition of the Odyssey reward deck generally matched how the other 2 worked, even though it was reduced in numbers. And it was, again, at the end of the day, designed to be combined with the other ones for a ludicrously large reward deck. So the stuff that you get in here, it's a mix of really good and pretty good. There's nothing in here that's bad per se. Because, again, since you were only going to have 23 cards, why sully that mix with anything terrible? So there's only one attack card, and it's an attack 8. And the reason I chose 8 was because of the Joker alien from Cosmic Dominion. It starts off by using attack 8s as wild cards. I thought it would be fun to have one more attack 8 in the mix just to make that card more likely to come up. And instead of more attack cards, we included a new type of encounter card. So these are safeguards. And safeguards actually started off as yet another attempt by me to include a defend card in there. But it did get changed by Fantasy Flight because having the word defend on an encounter card was too confusing. Apparently, if the defense plays an attack card, that makes perfect sense, and nobody has ever had any issue with that. But the word defend was just too much for some playtesters, and fair enough. So the way the safeguard works, though, is while it is its own type of encounter card, if it's opposed by an attack, it is essentially turns into an attack card. But its secondary effect is that for every ship that you have in the encounter, you get to eliminate an opposing ship. And that can have pretty big repercussions on the encounter, not just in the encounter totals, but in who actually gets anything if the other side wins. From do you get any rewards? Do you even land on the planet? If you have enough ships in the encounter, you can remove entire players from the outcome. So the safeguards are a pretty powerful, interesting effect. And of course, opposed by anything else, it becomes a negotiate, which is a pretty good go-to formula for these special encounter cards. So again, if you're playing an alien like Hate or Love, who gets to discard a type of card, Safeguard is its own type. It doesn't count as an encounter card because the example is attack, negotiate, artifact, etc. And attacks and negotiates are both encounter cards. But if Hate discards a safeguard and you don't have a safeguard of your own to discard, well, it sucks to be you. You're going to lose 3 ships, and Hate's going to pick which ones you're going to lose, so you're probably going to lose a colony. So, again, the numbers here, it's fairly close to the spread on the Incursion. 21 is the highest we get there. Nothing negative, but a couple of low cards. So, if you are playing a safeguard and revealing it, chances are it's going to be a relatively low number. Probably not going to win the encounter, but at least you're not going to go down without a fight. Yes, of course, I added another Morph into the mix because Morph is actually a really good card. I really like it. I think it's a powerful card, and it's a tradition now to always include one Morph whenever you can. Since there were some people that were crazy about the retreats and wished that there had been 3, I threw one in there. So I tossed a bone to those people. It's just kind of a fun one-shot card in this one. There's only one negotiate, but it's a doozy. It's betrayal. Now, opposed by attack, it doesn't do anything special, but if you're opposed by a negotiate, it becomes an attack 0, which means that you were probably winning that encounter where you were probably going to lose before, or the other person thought you were going to be making a deal. Not so. Couple more reinforcements, but decided they needed to be relatively good, so 5s and 6s. And then, of course, kickers. I had to include kickers. Kept it simple, though. None of them have secondary effects, so just another 0, another 2, and another 3. So if you're getting a kicker from the total combined 3 decks, it's probably a kicker times 2, but some of them might go a little bit higher, a little bit lower. Have to have rifts, of course, and so I did a mix, 2 of the rifts that you get in Incursion, and 1 of the rifts from Dominion, the ones with the cards. And then finally, artifacts. So just 3 artifacts. And here I included another Omni Zap so that it could cover for several of the other Zap types. And then 2 new, one a card from olden days of Cosmic Keeper, which had never been part of the Fantasy Flight Edition, and then something brand new, which is the Repeater. And the Repeater just allows for some zany interactions because it copies an artifact. So if I play the Omni Zap, someone else could be like, well, I'm going to use this as an Omni Zap. It also lets you just copy an artifact that had been played previously as long as it's still in the discard pile. So again, it gives you some additional options. So like with the Dominion reward deck, the Odyssey reward deck is, of course, designed to be combined. And I think it works pretty well with either. It's probably closer in composition in terms of what's in there and the level of strength of the effects to the Incursion deck than it is to the Dominion deck. So it complements, I think, both decks pretty well. And when you do have them combined into a ludicrously large, 87 card reward deck, you've got a pretty good chance still of getting something decent. So about 33 of the cards total are encounter cards. So roughly 1/3 of the reward deck are encounter cards. That means roughly 2/3 are non-encounter cards. So those are usually the ones people are more interested in getting. But even if you're getting an encounter card, odds are that's going to be a pretty decent one, at least, higher than a 10. And then, again, if you have the Ultra rewards, they are designed to be part of this massive 3 expansion reward deck thing. And then it spreads out if you shuffled up all those 90 cards thoroughly, you're not going to see a lot of the Ultra rewards coming up. Of course, if they are just part of your 23-card Odyssey reward deck, you're going to see a lot more of those rewards of the red back. So that is it. That's how they mix and match and compare. I love the reward deck. It's definitely my favorite variant in Cosmic Encounter, and I'm one of those players that definitely uses it all the time. I like now having the really big one because it does create a lot more variability in what's going to happen. So many different outcomes. You're not guaranteed to get the kickers that you need, but you might get a couple of really good ones. And the rifts are basically 1/8 of the whole deck. So just enough that you know they're out there, and it should make you nervous about taking compensation from somebody in the form of reward cards, which you can target, even though it says at random. You can choose those cards. So that's it. So let me know what you think of the reward deck. Are you a reward deck superfan like me? Let me know some of your favorite parts of the different reward decks. Do you have a favorite deck of the 3? Tell me if you do and why. And if you've created your own home brews, have you added them to your reward deck? Let me know what cards you've got in there. My reward decks in Tabletop Simulator are not the same as the ones in the real world. That's not entirely true. I have been printing additional cards, but like I said, the one I use in TTS is slightly different. There's actually 3 different backs, and it's fun to mix and match and play around. I'm always looking for interesting new ideas to add in. So there you have it. Thanks for watching.